Okay, good evening, everybody. Hello. Before I launch in too deep, I just want to check that I am sort of sufficiently clearly audible.
Yes.
Great, great. Excited to hear it because it's a new mic. And it's been very difficult to get it right. So that's great. Okay. Let us see. I'm going to be talking about a koan tonight. I'm going to be continuing the little exploration of the gateless gate that I've been doing since last summer. We've got to case 13. And last week we were lucky enough to hear from Peshin from North Carolina, who gave a beautiful talk as it happens on case 12 of the gateless gate. Just for a recap for those who haven't been here for all this sequence of these talks, the gateless gate is it's a thing that isn't a thing, the gateless gate, which I'll explore a little bit tonight, but it's also a book of koans, 48 koans. And I've been slowly working through it since last summer. And it so happened that the last one I talked about was case 11 during our retreat back in early February. Valerie and myself and a number of you all joined that. And then last week, as it happened, Peshin spoke to case 12. Therefore, I'm going straight to case 13 without talking to case 12. Maybe I'll circle back later. But before I do any of that, let's just sit for a moment and just reflect on what's happened since last week. The world really in convulsion and upheaval and turmoil because of essentially one man. Basically, one man. You know, we talk in Buddhism about the three poisons. Occasionally in the sutras, they're also referred to as the three fires. Not usually, but they are greed or desire, aversion or ill will, and delusion or ignorance or misunderstanding. And what's going on right now is a very concentrated illustration of all three of them. Very concentrated and impactful, showing very clearly why they can be so destructive in a very concentrated way. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that a Buddhist view could be that they're ongoingly destructive over vast periods of time, of human history. So they're sort of the background to our world, really, the underpinnings of our world. Those of you who've read David Lloyd's book, Money, Sex, War, Karma, will understand. You know, that book is a set of essays that explore how the three poisons work out culturally, largely in our world. So it's no surprise to see them active. What's shocking at the moment is to see them so active in such a potently concentrated form, basically in one person. Now, I know that's simplifying things a lot because there isn't really only one person. There's a lot of factors as well outside of the clear instigator of the aggression and violence going on right now. But nevertheless, if you just start with ignorance, delusion, self-delusion, one man kind of holding up and telling himself more and more only what he wants to believe, surrounding himself with fearful, yes people who only mirror back to him, echo back to him what he wants to hear. This is the classic tyrant, actually, and then that's the third poison. Then second, well, the aggression needs no comment. Being able to throw 200,000 or something soldiers into an inferno of killing, and upheaval for so many people, and then the desire, the greed to have things go one's way, to possess, to overrun and acquire, impose one's will, all of that. I mean, this is this is actually an occasion for not only the heartbreak that many of us might well be feeling, and the sense of powerlessness and the shock of that something like this can be happening in our world today, and in so close, really, and of course with modern news, we hear about it, so it becomes intimate when people in the midst of it are being interviewed, and so we're really getting a sense of what they're going through, and it's so sort of bewildering that this could be happening, and that it could be somehow permitted, that there really isn't so easy to just sort of stop something like this without escalating it. And it's a terrible shock, I think, for many of us. But I want to say, sort of, in somehow I want to say, how do I put it? I don't want to come off wrong, but it oughtn't to be such a shock, is kind of what I want to try to say, because these three poisons are operative in the human body, mind, heart. They are. And the reason they're identified as poisons is that they can be wildly destructive, terribly harmful. And from the perspective of the Buddha, it's sort of unrealistic, actually, to imagine that we could have a world devoted to the peace and happiness and well-being and care and concern and love for and of all beings, if we don't address these three poisons. The first level of ignorance is not to understand the three poisons, not to even have an inkling. And I'm sure many of you will know from great masters like Thich Nhat Hanh that those masters at that level don't see, the quote unquote villains as outside of themselves. They don't think that they're immune to the kinds of forces that are driving the more villainous people, the more destructive, harmful people. It's in human nature, to be susceptible to these things. And it's tricky because, all of us can't help but want to have a sort of a good self-image, if we can, kind of thing. So we don't like to think that we could be hosts to the negative urges and negative inclinations and harmful intentions. But it's actually, in certain way, it's a kind of an element of sort of a maturation, I think, to be rather able to say, wow, yes, there is some little trace of ill will I just detected in me. Wow, I never would have thought that was there. Lo and behold, it is. So it seems to me it's growth, actually, to be able to acknowledge that and have that kind of frankness with ourselves about what we may still harbor or what we may sometimes experience. Rather than thinking, it's a real temptation and sort of danger, I think, in practice, to, want to feel that we're doing sort of really well in our practice, therefore not as susceptible to the three poisons. Very, very true, it may not be. But part of that increasing freedom from them isn't actually banishing them. It's also, that may be part of it, that we are decontaminating, but detoxifying, but we're actually also becoming more aware of them. Thich Nhat Hanh has that amazing, famous poem where, I think it's "Call Me by My True Names." I think is that right? Is that what it's called? Something like that. Some of you may know. It's something like that. Put it in the chat by all means if anybody knows it. But anyway, it's a poem that I think is quite well known, and he says, I've been the victim of rape and murder. I've also been the rapist and the murderer. Something along those lines. Acknowledging, we're all heir to human experience. And so actually to distance ourselves, oppose ourselves, is very understandable when we're looking at, tyrannical sort of figures. But from a practice point of view, there may be a somehow deeper way of looking at it. This is not to say, we sit on our hands. I'm sure you've all already done what you can and will do more to support the many poor people suffering at the hands of this, this convulsion of this vortex of poisons. And track in yourself what it brings up, and how we, sort of sifting apart the compassion, and what else is there? Is there ill will? And can there be a kind of a helpful determination to do what we can to stop the madness, without ill will, what would that look like? I'm not offering answers here, I'm just inviting exploration. Okay, so Koan. What is it if we just take it as a koan? That's what I mean. Koan. What's left? What does a koan approach release, strip away, make bare, make clear about this situation? What is this situation really when all is sort of stripped away? This is what a koan can do. It can strip away, make bare, make clear. Koan is never far away and long ago. Never. It's always right here. So let's see. This one we're going to look at tonight. Let me remind you that in Zen's ideology, mythology, lore, legend, I don't know, in Zen's self-understanding, what happened was that sort of one stream of the Buddha's teachings was committed into the sutras. Many, many sutras conveying how the Buddha had taught and the things he had taught. And they were memorized above all by Ananda, his cousin, who after he died at the first council sort of regurgitated everything he'd memorized. It was carefully memorized by many others who then passed it on, and some 200 or 300 years later or something, they started to get written down, copies were made, and so it goes. And then, today, I don't know how early the earliest actual texts are, but I don't think they go back to 200 BCE. I think there may be some from, early in the first millennium. I'm not exactly sure, but around 200 CE or something like that. Maybe there's some earlier, I'm not sure. I mean, actually, there's extant manuscript copies of the sutras. But meanwhile, in Zen's tradition, not only did the Buddha express his realization, the world as he saw it, as he knew it, his experience, not only did he express it in the sutras, which were records of teachings he gave, but he also had a special transmission, quote unquote, by which he passed on to Kashyapa, the sort of his successor, not words, but his very experience. And he didn't pass it on by sort of zapping Kashyapa in some way. You know, it was more that Kashyapa had met him in it, and they both realized that they were both experiencing in the same way. And then Kashyapa carried on the teaching, the living of that experience, this experience, and then in time he passed it on to Ananda, and so on. And that all of that, this, they call it the transmission, was not of words, it was of experience. And this experience got flowed down through humans over hundreds of years, and all the way to Bodhidharma in India, who brought it to, who wafted to China as an old man, and he in turn had his successor, Eka or Weka, who successor in the sense that Weka came to realize the same experience, same reality. This, you know, just this, clear, seeing it clearly, knowing it, being it clearly, not being separate from it, and experiencing and knowing and seeing it very clearly, very clearly. And he passed it on, ding, 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 all the way to through the Chinese ancestors and Japanese ancestors and so on. So here we are today. This is the, I mean, make of it what you will, but that's the story. And it's not quite as far-fetched as it might sound, in the sense that, in a couple of senses. One is that actually we humans are built in such a way that all of us can release whatever needs to be released in order to realize the same experience, the same way of experiencing. It's not something that you have to be special or strange for. It's actually part of our human, it is part of our sort of human makeup. That you know, that simply all of us can come to, can uncover, because it's never hidden. Actually, it's only that we get caught in certain manners of experiencing, certain sort of paths of experience, ways of knowing, ways of experiencing. We get caught in them and stuck, and we get attached to them. And we don't realize that they're only one fairly narrow way. It's as if we were, no, I can't think of a good metaphor right now. Maybe it'll come to me later, but I think you get the point. And we don't have to. We can let those go. We can let go our attachment to specific narrow ways of experiencing. And then things get much more open, and we can actually sort of clearly find this wonderful, easy way of being that is very open, and it's boundless, and it's also empty, and it's also showing up as things just as they are freely, and it's perfectly capable of doing all the things we're familiar with in space and in time, but we also know that there's no time and no space. So without time, it's not, without time and without space, it's not really a puzzle that sort of Buddha's mind and Kashyapa's mind could be one. That's no puzzle at all, you know, and nor that Buddha's mind could get sort of passed on down the generations. It's not really a mystery. It's from that perspective, you see what I mean? From the perspective that has released, where we've been released from a narrow contraction into our notions of many things, including space and time and separateness. When those are released, no problem. you know, it's not really a mystery anymore. Or at least it's not a mystery how Buddha's experience could be, quote unquote, passed on. It sort of doesn't need to be passed on. There's no passing on that needs to happen, kind of thing. So, okay, sorry, this is all background to the Koan, because the Koan I want to look at, you know, it is about three masters, two of them who already had found their way to this, one who hadn't yet, in Tang Dynasty China, and who had done, two of them had already, at the time of the Koan, had already done this releasing. Well, it had happened. They hadn't really done it, it had happened. And one of them hadn't. So if we have that in mind, when we approach a Koan, you know, just sort of reflecting on kind of what's the point of a Koan, this is the point of a Koan, is that it can be quite a helpful device for bringing us up against what we hold on to. Because what we don't understand about the Koan will be, we won't understand it because of ways of seeing and experiencing and knowing that we're attached to. When those release, we'll get it. And the Koan wants to help us release in that kind of way. Okay. So this is page 13 of the Gateless Gate. Tokusan carries his bowls, or Daishan carries his bowls. I'm going to just start with the first part, because it's rather, compared with some, it's a long one. Okay, one day, Tokusan came down to the hall, carrying his bowls. Seppo said to him, "Old master, the bell hasn't yet rung, nor the drum sounded. Where are you going with your bowls?" Tokusan immediately went back to his room. Seppo told this to Ganto. Ganto said, "Great Tokusan though he is, he has not yet realized the last word." Okay, we'll go to the rest of it later, but for now, the sort of two key elements of the Koan have already shown up. One being Tokusan turning around and walking back to his room. The other being Ganto's comment. He may be a great master, old Tokusan, but he hasn't yet realized the last word. What is the last word? Maybe that's really the primary heart of this koan. What is the last word? Okay, now, before we delve into either of those points, I got to tell you a little bit about who all these people are. Three of them: Tokusan, Ganto, Seppo. In Chinese, Deishan, Yanto, Shuifeng. Okay, I'm going to stick with the Japanese pronunciation. Tokusan was actually the teacher of the other two. He's a celebrated master in Zen history for having been sort of exceptionally clear. But there's an interesting point. In some way, he's also come down in the tradition as if there's a sort of fine-tuning kind of thing, or the balance between being thoroughly clear, meaning really, really thoroughly having had everything fall away, having had everything totally fall away. So there's not a molecule left anywhere. And being sort of able to know that or experience that, not really experience, not really know, but that being apparent all the time, really just everything's gone. The balance between that on the one side, true realization, true liberation, really thorough realization, thorough liberation, thorough awakening. And on the other hand, somehow sort of I don't want to contrast these things too much, but sort of I want to say compassionate capacity to meet the rest of us who aren't quite so clear, or are much less clear. A sort of compassionate capacity to really reach out and be with us deluded folks who are trying to get a little bit clearer. Some sort of balance of those two kind of thing in a great teacher is, I'm just going to say that somehow Tokusan's come down in the tradition as being maybe a little bit too strong on one side, the total clarity. Because he was quite a tough, I was almost going to say intolerant, but I don't think that's right. Quite a tough teacher. He would, he'd shout a lot, use a stick, not very kindly, I think. There's famous stories of him. There was a period of his teaching when basically the only thing he would say to students was wrong. And often he'd shout it, wrong, he wasn't actually just trying to put them down and be mean. He was really trying to help clarify their Dharma eye, open them up, But it's not necessarily the most effective way of doing it. Sometimes it's not the only method. There can be kinder ways that are just as effective. And he's sometimes sort of regarded as having been, I think, just as a teacher, a little too remote in his utter clarity, something like that. You see, I don't know if you can get a feeling of that. There's a certain austerity to his total clarity, something like that. Anyway, recognized nevertheless as an exceptionally clear master in the tradition. He has these two students, a famous pair, actually. They're two Dharma brothers who come up in, there's some quite sort of colorful stories about them. And they're sort of key, sort of classic figures in the heart of Tang Dynasty Zen when it was in its great flourishing. Ganto was younger than Seppo and awakened apparently rather more easily than Seppo, just by virtue of his karma or whatever, and was often trying to help his dear friend and Dharma brother Seppo to get clear. Seppo sat long and hard, decades, multiple decades, without really getting clear. And then actually it was Ganto who gave him a nudge at a certain point that really let everything fall away for him too. And Seppo, in fact, became probably the greater teacher, actually, maybe of all three of them. Ganto had the disadvantage of dying relatively young. so perhaps didn't have time to mature as a teacher. But he was, as I said, he was often trying to help Seppo get clearer. And this koan is one instance of that, trying to help Seppo get clearer. And of course, trying to help us get clearer. Koans are, not to be thought of, as practice aids. Don't think of them as stories far away and long ago. It's okay to think of them as that. But when you practice with a koan, don't think of it that way. Think of it as addressing your own experience and our part, our task, our invitation with a koan is to find out in what way it meets our experience right now. So the 2 points in the koan so far, and actually one of them remains the main point, really, is this moment at the start, the incident that causes the koan to unfold, is Tokusan as an old man walking basically to the hall, whether that's the dining hall or the main Dharma hall where they were going to eat, I don't know, but he was carrying his bowls, which meant he was expecting to eat. And young Seppo, a student of his, sort of stops him and says, "Old master, the bell hasn't rung, the drum hasn't sounded, meaning for mealtime. That hasn't happened. Where do you think you're going with your bowls?" Maybe Tokusan, he's an old man now, getting a bit doddery, a bit befuddled, who knows. But anyway, he just turns around and goes back to his room with his bowls. So first point, this moment, Seppo saying, no, it's not yet mealtime. And Tokusan turning and going back to his room with his bowls. Just that. Can you feel there's something there? There's some treasure right there. Tokusan returned to his room with his bowls. Just that. Okay. That's koan point 1. Koan point 2. Seppo tells his buddy Ganto about this. Remember, Ganto's already vast and clear. Seppo isn't. What's Tokusan doing with his bowls? Why was he coming to dinner? But it's not dinner time, That's Ganto. That's Seppo. Ganto, he sees an opportunity to help Seppo. And he says, as if in confirmation of Seppo's wondering, doubting, questioning about the old master, says, well, people think he's a great master, but he hasn't yet realized the last word. That's what Ganto just comes out of him to say to Seppo. So then Seppo has to go away, sort of scratching his head. He's a great master, but there's something he hasn't realized yet. And it's the last word. What's the last word? He's planting a little bomb, sorry, that's not a very appropriate analogy. He's planting I was going to say a seed, but that's not quite right, actually. He's, I don't know, setting a little trap. for seppo. What is the last word? This is point 2, Koan point number 2. What is the last word? The last word. So I would encourage you, as we're coming to the end of this talk, which we're going to call part 1 of case 13 of the Gateless Gate, part 1. Why don't you, if you're interested, and if it's not disruptive of something else you're doing in your practice, which actually maybe would be a good thing, but whatever, why don't you ask yourself when you're sitting, I'm sitting here, Ganto asks Seppo, what is the last word, basically? Seppo asks himself, what is the last word? So right here now, how does this question, what's the last word, apply to my experience right now? So when I'm sitting, I might be facing the wall, I might not be facing the wall, I'm sitting, and all I got to do is just run now and then through the mind, run the words, last word. The last word. And without trying to figure anything out, because one of the things that koans require us to drop, help us to drop, is the mind of figuring out. You don't have to figure anything out. This is not a figuring out process. This is not a problem-solving process. What's the last word? Don't try to find the last word. Don't do anything. Allow the koan to work on you in your immediate experience. So you're sitting, there's a floor in front of you, with what's the last word? And just see if the word, the phrase, the last word, somehow can sort of ignite in your experience. And then the words of the koan drop away and the reality of the koan appears. And it implicates you very, very directly and intimately. In other words, the koan can come to life only in your experience. So we're saying, what's the last word? And if we were trying to do any figuring out with our mind, it won't sort of work. It's not interested, the koan's not interested in that. It's interested in showing us something about what our experience actually is that we're not currently seeing. So it can't do that when the mind's trying to figure it out. It can only have a shot at it when the mind's basically not doing anything. So all we do is, what's the last word? The last word. I mean by all we do is, we just ask that. We just ask that question. We may even forget the question, just last word. And just sort of, it's an act of trust, really. Last word. You don't have to do, really, you sort of, I was going to say, you don't have to do anything else, but it's almost different. It's almost really, you sort of have to do nothing else. And then the koan can fill everything. Complete everything. complete, fulfill everything. Koan can do that. Each koan is that very mind of Buddha. In this Zen way, this is how the mind of Buddha comes to forth in each of us. So it comes down to us, sort of, really comes forth in each of us. So each koan, each one, is really a remarkable. So it's a big deal. Each one is a big deal. Very big deal. A very, very big deal. A life-changing matter. Each koan is a life-changing matter. It's easy to think, well, that's 48 of them in that book, and there's 5 books. I mean, there's hundreds of these things. How can they all be important? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that they are. It's very wonderful, really. Okay. Phew, I've gone on longer than I thought. I'm sorry. Hope it's been some help. I haven't even really got to them. We just touched on it. We just opened it up. I'm afraid I'm going to have to do another talk on this one. So we'll figure out a time for that. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for patiently listening. I hope it's some help. I hope you find your practice to be the refuge for your whole life that it truly is.